So we're going to start with this picture at the top. Now, if I had to give a title to this picture, I would label this the excretory system. And if I have to give a definition for what your excretory system does, your excretory system removes metabolic waste. That's its function. So I'd like to talk about the word metabolic just for a second so that everyone is clear on what it stands for. The word metabolic refers to metabolism, and so this is making a reference to the fact that there had to be some sort of reaction. Your body used a molecule for energy, digested a molecule, some sort of chemical process happened, and there are molecules left over as the result. So metabolic waste means that we did some sort of reaction with it. Most often it's that your body used molecules for energy and there are things left over from that process. And so there's one specific reaction that I'll introduce to you that you probably haven't heard of before. But don't forget that cellular respiration is a reaction, and that would be a good example of something that's producing metabolic waste. Now, if we take a look at the picture, one of the things that I'd like you to recognize is that anytime we're looking at human anatomy, there are usually two sides to whatever we're looking at. So most systems have a left and a right side. Anytime that's the case, I'd like you to remember that on a picture, it's backwards. And the reason that it's backwards is because we're imagining if this were part of an actual person who we're looking at, what's on the right side of my picture would actually be on the left side of that person, and vice versa. So anatomical drawings are usually backwards in terms of left and right. So you'll notice that there are basically identical lines along the left and right side, and that's because you have two of a lot of the structures in your excretory system. The first couple of things that I'd like to mention have to do with blood vessels. So even though we're not specifically talking about your circulatory system, blood plays a really important role, just like it did in digestion, in excretion. But we're actually going to name some structures. So if you take a look at the pictures, you have two blood vessels, one here and one there. Chances are you colored them different colors. Now there's no rule about which one has to be on the left and which one has to be on the right. But if you take a look at your textbook or at most drawings, we'll just make sure that I'm copying your textbook here when I do this. We'll just make our picture be the same as the one in your textbook so that everything matches up. And in your textbook, we have, oops, I went too far. Seriously. In your textbook, they have blue on the left and red on the right. So this one is blue, and this one is red. Now that's fairly significant, and when we talk about your circulatory system, we'll talk about this even more. But we generally color blood vessels two different colors so that we can distinguish between arteries and veins. Does anyone know why we would color one of them blue and one of them red? Yes. Is that your hand up? Yeah? Is the other way around, but that's the right idea. We're talking about whether or not there's oxygen in them. Generally, arteries have oxygen, and I say generally because there is an exception that we'll talk about later in the circulatory system. But for the most part, arteries have blood that has oxygen in them, and veins have blood that does not, where the oxygen has been used up. And so generally, we would color arteries red, and we would color veins blue. Now that's not like a rule that you have to do, but whenever you're looking at pictures and you see blood vessels, that is usually the color scheme that's used. Now if we talk about the actual arteries that you have, this top line up here on either side, it's not pointing to the exact same structure then. One of them's an artery, one of them's the vein. The artery that's coming down here is a branch of your aorta, and the vein that's coming down is a branch of your vena cava. Those are the two main blood vessels that bring blood away from your heart and then back towards your heart. And so most of the organs will have an artery or a vein that branches off of one of those. So for example, if I follow my artery down, and it goes over this way, where it's entering my kidney, which is a structure we'll talk about shortly, that is what I would call, this side has it labeled a bit better, but this is your renal artery, and you have one on both sides. So there's a renal artery here and a renal artery there. That is the blood that is going into your kidney. And so the direction of flow is that blood goes downwards here through the artery into your kidney, and then it's going to come back out of your kidney through the vein. So the other blood vessel here is a branch of your vein. This is your renal vein, and you have one on both sides. Blood is coming out of the kidney here and going back up towards your heart. So in terms of blood flow so far, does anyone have questions they'd like to ask about the structure or which way blood is flowing in them? Where's your staff? The next thing that we'll talk about then are the structures. Now the first thing I'll mention are these two little structures up here at the top. They're there because I like to show you what you would actually see. We're not going to talk about them in this section specifically, but just so you know, this is your adrenal gland. It's where adrenaline comes from. So when you're feeling panicked and nervous and you feel like you get a boost of energy, it's probably your adrenaline kicking in. You have one on both sides. Your adrenal gland is stimulated directly by your nervous system, so you can get signals sent there very quickly, but it's also stimulated by your hormones. Now it's called adrenal because it is adjacent to your kidney. And that's one of the reasons I like to have this word on here. Anytime you see renal, we are talking about your kidneys. Renal artery, renal vein, adrenal gland. These are all things that are making reference to your kidney. So, here is your kidney. It is this structure. You have one on both sides. Someone asked me what would happen if you lost a kidney or donated a kidney, and the answer was you would still be able to do everything that your kidneys do, just not as much and not as quickly. And so you can survive with only one kidney. You just have to be a little more careful about what you ingest and what kind of waste your body is producing so that your kidney that you have left is not overworked. Now if we go a little bit lower down on the picture, we'll see some more tubes and some more pieces. These two tubes here are called, and it's really important that you spell this right, a ureter. You have one on each side. So ureters are things you have two of. One connecting the kidney on the left to the structure down here, which is your bladder. and one coming from the kidney on the other side. Now that's different than the structure that's way down at the bottom, which is your urethra. And so ureter and urethra look very similar, so it will be really important that if you're writing these words out, that you spell them properly. Otherwise, I might think that you're talking about a part that you're not actually discussing. Now, if we talk about functions of these parts that we've just labeled, your kidney's function is mainly to filter. It's going to filter waste out of your blood and put things that you want to get rid of in your urine, take back things that you don't want to have in your urine. So as part of the filtering process, it will reabsorb and it will secrete. So your kidney will filter your blood, and then once it's done its filtering, it'll check. Are there substances in the blood that or in the urine that I want to keep, like water? Are there things that I still want to add, like excess hydrogen so that the pH is not so low in my body? The ureter is simply a tube that connects your kidney to your bladder. So this is just for transport of urine. Your bladder is for storage. Now on this particular picture, unlike the one that's in your textbook, there were a couple of extra lines. And so I just wanted to show you that this line here is indicating that your ureters actually go inside of your bladder. So these are the ureter openings. It doesn't just end at the edge of your bladder and empty into it like a big balloon. And I'd also like to add that what's down here is a little sphincter. So you have a muscle that controls whether or not your bladder releases its contents or holds its contents, and you have voluntary control over that muscle. That's why you can hold your pee if you need to. That's the muscle that you can contract simply. It's usually you feel like you're squeezing your stomach, but you're actually contracting that muscle as well. Up until there, does anyone have anything that they would like to ask about the pieces that you see in this diagram? So your kidney's main job is to filter things. And we'll see that your kidney actually does a couple of other things too. It doesn't just filter. It also helps regulate water levels and regulate pH. Now we'll talk about those at the end after we talk about the filtering process, because that's its major function. But I would like to mention how this whole section here, my goodness, is that homeostasis happening. Your kidney is constantly monitoring levels of things in your blood and in your urine and trying to keep them at constant, consistent levels. Basically, anything that the kidney does is a good example of homeostasis. Yes? We're going to talk about reasons that that would happen, but on the surface, the main reason would be that you have excess of something else in your urine as well. Water always likes to be where the concentration is high. So let's say that you're diabetic and you have a lot of sugar. Your body will try to get rid of the extra sugar, and to dilute it so that your urine is at a proper concentration, water will follow along with it. Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask right now? So we'll scroll down then and we will look at your kidney itself and talk about up close what some of the sections of your kidney are. So this is just one kidney. You know that this would happen twice in your body. And your kidney has three really distinct sections. The first section I will color let's color it red, is this external section that runs all the way around the outside. That is called the renal cortex. The word cortex means bark, and so a lot of structures have a cortex around them. It's always the outside layer of tissue of any organ or structure that we're talking about. Now the second part are these little sort of triangle-shaped pieces that are a bit darker, and this is true to life. When we cut up kidneys on Friday, you will see that the outer layer of tissue on a kidney is lighter, and then there's these really dark portions in the middle. These sections are called the renal medulla. And then right in the center, right here, there's sort of a space, a spot where things could collect. This is called the renal pelvis. So we have 3 layers, more or less, going from outside to inside. Now, if we take a look at what else is attached here, this tube over here that is obviously going downwards from your kidney to somewhere else is a ureter. And we already know from the previous diagram that your ureter connects your kidney to your bladder. Just so we know, urine travels through your ureter and it travels downwards. So it will come from your renal pelvis to your ureter. So there's a connection right here from your renal pelvis to your ureter. Now, in terms of the blood vessels, you can see that you have 2 blood vessels, again, one coming in, one going out. We'll call this one, I'll do it red, the renal artery. And we will call this one the renal vein. Generally, the artery is on top and the vein is on the bottom, but realistically, I would have to show you something about which way blood was flowing for you to be confident which one of those you were looking at. Just so we know, blood flows in through the artery and out through the vein. Yes? Mm-hmm. Well, if you look, though, really, the renal artery, if you take a peek at it and follow it, like, it goes up here, and then the other one comes down here. Like, they're both going around the medulla. And what we would see is that that's not actually the end of them. They split up even farther into little tiny vessels after that. I just wouldn't ask you to draw any more than that because it would get a little bit too complicated. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask here? So just so that we know what's happening in each one of the sections, in the renal cortex, that is where you find the majority of the filtration unit. The filtration unit is called a nephron. And most of it is actually in the renal cortex. The renal medulla has a very small part of the filtration unit. It is called the loop of Henle. So a little bit of the filtration unit dips down into the medulla, but the rest of it is outside in the cortex. The renal pelvis is for collection from the filtration units. So when you look at a kidney on the surface, you can't see the filtration unit. It is very tiny. Even when we dissect an actual kidney, you won't be able to visually see it without the aid of some magnification because it's just really, really tiny. You have thousands, if not millions, of these little filtration units in each of your kidneys. So when we dissect kidneys, this is more or less what you're going to be able to see. You're not going to be able to see any closer than that. Now the next thing that we need to talk about is this filtration unit, the nephron. And so that's the picture that's on the back side of the page. If you could flip there, please. So there are a bunch of structures that you would need to be able to identify. And especially in this picture, I think that coloring was really worth your while to help you distinguish between all of the tubes that are crisscrossing over one another. So I'm just going to start by highlighting blood vessels. A lot of the time, we'll color this section of blood vessels in the middle purple because it's where arteries and veins meet each other. It's called a capillary net. And because oxygenated and deoxygenated blood are kind of mixing, that's why we'd use purple. So if I look at all of these skinny little lines here, and I highlight them, these are all part of what we call the net of capillaries. And it's called a net because that's kind of the shape that it takes. So it weaves around, it goes in front, it goes behind all of the tubes that are part of your kidneys. Make sure I get all of these. And you'll see that it winds all around the whole entire structure. And so if you didn't take the time in the beginning to highlight that, it might help you distinguish where all of the tubes are and make it a little easier to see the actual nephron. So that whole part that I highlighted purple is called the capillary net. Now, what is a capillary? A capillary is a very, very thin-walled blood vessel. And that's important because things can cross the wall of a capillary very easily. And so that's why they surround this particular tissue. The capillary net is there to reabsorb water and to secrete additional waste. So even though your kidney is filtering your blood, it doesn't always catch everything. And sometimes it lets a little bit too much water in, or it doesn't take enough of the waste product out. And so to help correct that and keep things consistent, the capillary net surrounds your nephron so that substances can continue to go from the nephron to your bloodstream and vice versa. If we're talking about blood vessels over here, and I look at what is coming in, this blood vessel is coming in. The blood would be flowing in this direction. So this has to be your renal artery. Now specifically, that would be one little branch of your renal artery. It's not the whole thing, because don't forget, you have millions of these little structures kicking around in your kidneys. So this would be a branch of the renal artery. Now if you look, it comes into this structure that's like a big ball here. And this is still blood. That is called the glomerulus. And then if you look, the blood vessel is the same color on the other side. So this is all still artery. Now if I'm talking about the glomerulus, which we will, I would need to indicate which side of the artery I was talking about. So since the blood is coming from this side and going in, and then coming out on that side, the way we would label the two sides of the branch of the artery here, we'll call them A and B. A would be called the afferent arteriole, and B would be called the efferent arteriole. An arteriole is a small branch of an artery. And then we have the word afferent and the word efferent. Now those two words are used in biology a lot to describe direction. The way I like to remember this, something that is afferent, whoops, what just happened here? Something that is afferent, there we go. Something that is afferent arrives at a structure. Something that is efferent exits. And so that's how you would know which one is which. The one that comes into the glomerulus is the afferent arteriole, and the one that leaves the glomerulus is called the efferent arteriole. Now the other part of our blood picture is the veins. From the other side of the capillary net, we have a branch here of your renal vein, and blood would be coming up this way and out like this. So this is a branch of the renal vein. So that part is the blood. We haven't even talked about the actual filtration unit of your kidney yet, but I wanted to make sure everybody understood which way the blood was flowing and what things were called. Would anybody like to ask questions about blood, blood vessels, which way things are going? Yes. Are you going to have to, sorry? Yeah, I'm going to be done talking in about 5 minutes here. Does anybody else have questions that they would like to ask? So then the other part of this diagram is actually your nephron. So your nephron is the filtration unit of your kidney, and it's all of the tubes that are left sort of behind the blood. The first part of your nephron, right here, looks kind of like a little cup that surrounds the glomerulus. So that part, number 1, is called Bowman's capsule. Then if you follow the nephron up, you'll see that you get this twisty, convoluted tube. That section here is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal because it's close to Bowman's capsule, convoluted because it's all twisty, and tubule because it's a tube. After the proximal convoluted tubule, you'll notice that the tube dips down and makes a loop. This part down here is the loop of Henle. That's the part of your nephron that dips down into the medulla. Most of the part at the top is in the cortex, but the tip of the loop of Henle dips down into the renal medulla. If we follow it back up, you get another twisty section of tube over here. That is the distal convoluted tubule. And then finally you get this sort of branch-looking thing that has a bunch of stems on it. Each of these would go to a nephron. And this structure is called the collecting duct. So I'm just going to pause here.